I'm Mr. Rosansky, and this is a speed run of practice test for the first module, the medium module, module A. As with all tests, as soon as I get here, I'm going to go for the first conventions question, often somewhere after 14, and what a beaut. The first one here is a conventions question. I notice that it seems to have punctuation that's changing, so I skip the omega considerations and I look for this beautiful dash first, because I love dashes. I see no other dash in the text, therefore this dash is equivalent to this colon, and it's trash. Then I just consider, well, what's coming to go in between these two guys? I know it's going to be this one because my verb here needs to have access to its subject, and this lone comma would be pretty trash. For this next one, as I look over here, I see the complete sentence mix up in all of its beauty. I've got a lone comma, I've got a space, I've got a lonely coordinating conjunction, and then I've got this beaut of a guy. I'm going to bias that D is the right answer, but I'm going to go looking for complete sentences, and sure enough, to the left, I've got my subject and my verb standing proud on this side. The with is just some sort of phrase at the start of this, a prepositional phrase, and here I land on my other independent clause. So I have two independent clauses, periods, totally chill to be between these two complete sentences. And then I move on. I see omega consideration possession seems to be triggered. I like to kill things that have words possessing verbs. Right after the blank seems to be a verb, and there is a verb here. Therefore, A and C are trash because they're offering something to possess a verb, which doesn't make any sense. Then I'm going to engage with the notion of possession. I've got individual snow grains, physical properties. If I want the option that's provided in B, then I should be able to do some sort of flippy flop with these guys with the preposition of, which will prove that I do want possession. And an example of that would be the physical properties of the individual snow grains. That this concept is what I'm trying to express. The burden of this of is possession. In the original form, I would need to choose the word that is possessive as well. We move forward. As I look at the shapes still in the convention land, I see a coordinating conjunction, a space, a semicolon, which is kind of beautiful, and that lonely comma. This seems to be the complete sentence mix-up, so if I'm feeling a little bit frisky, I can go launching right into the sentence for it. On the left side, I do seem to have this thing that is operating as a subject, bouncing over this little bridge here, accessing this verb. This is an independent clause. Therefore, there's a complete sentence there. And I've got my it prioritized over here. Chillin' as a little independent clause, complete sentence on this side. Therefore, this semicolon can handle the burden of joining these two playas. I see that these are verbs, so that omega consideration is triggered. I see a singular verb, a plural verb, a plural verb, a plural verb. Therefore, I'm going to bias the odd man out and go looking for subjects. The leaders isn't comfortable as the subject, but that's in a clause initial prepositional phrase. There's no comma here. Therefore, we've got some gamesmanship of inverting our subject and verb. There's my subject right there. Was gets our bid. This one, conventions, kind of zany. I've got a bridge in here, a big bridge here, this comma bridge list confusion, and then there's this colon that I'll look at first. So these are immediately going to skip past our omega considerations, our step 2, our step 3, and we're landing on this first. This colon, if you are considering just to the left of the colon, if you wouldn't use a period, you can't use a colon, right? Because there's the requirement to have a complete sentence. This guy falls for that reason. Reading over this bridge, I don't think that students would like, because this would imply that some cephalopods are not those things in like a restrictive manner. So we'll take that off the table. Then I've got these two guys. This is certainly going to be our bid. When I read the sentence and read over the bridge, that is all of this nonsense in here. I've got the reason discovered that cephalopods have a special genetic ability. That I love over the bridge. When I look inside to see what's happening, I see under the bridge, this ocean dwellers is describing cephalopods. I've got a relative clause in here that's just further describing kinds of ocean dwellers, and everything's fine with that. When I look back up to this original example, I've got this comma right here that's kind of abusive. It would be interacting with cephalopods in a bizarre way for an appositive. It's just not acceptable. D gets our bid. That's the hardest one in that set, I think, so far. I go to the verbs. I see a neither. Therefore, I go looking for an and. I don't have parallel structure, so this is going to be some sort of forming a clause question. As I start reading the question, seeing what my vibes are telling me. I see this model here, which is begging to be a subject. Though this verb looks like it's a subject, this is a reduced relative clause. I can put a that is or that was created by, so I know that this is not actually telling me when. This guy's just pretending. The verb of a model lands here with predicts. Then I've got that, which is starting a dependent clause. The rate of speciation, this seems to be a beautiful thing offering to be a subject because this is the that is starting some sort of dependent clause. Prepositional phrase, so I'm not going to go inside of there for anything of value. I'm going to read over this bridge. I've got another prepositional phrase here. This located looks like it's telling me when. However, I can plug in a little that is right there. So I know that this is just continuing phrase nonsense here. I keep cruising, another prepositional phrase. All of this from here to here is garbage. This is really heavily biasing my will be, as that is the only item that provides a verb that tells me when. And as I keep reading, I make the firm realization that if I choose this D, this dependent clause that started up here has no verb that tells it when, therefore it's not functioning. And then this independent clause is wildly lonely. I move on to our first transition question. We're out of the conventions. We can go a little bit slower. As I read this sentence, I see that the first idea seems to be that she's conducting on destinations featured in her book are its own reward. This seems to be a very important context clue. In the next one, she's talking about the research phase of her work, just as fascinating as being there in person. I recognize the relationship between these two things to be very similar. There's no contrast here, and there's no contrast here. These fall through. Likewise is a secondary support transition. It would be saying that this thing is not this thing and supports some sort of overarching idea up here. I don't have that. I've just got my in fact. These seem to be samey chill guys. So I pick him to move on. Wow, just one transition? Wild stuff. I move to question 22. In 22, I see my demand seems to be singular. I want to introduce this novel with the sub-demand of people who are already familiar with Bharati Mukherjee. So this is what I'm going to go after first, eliminating any of these that don't do that. Because from my experience, this already familiar, seeing this right here would be insulting for audience who knows who this person already is. And when I read this last one, this would be an insulting bit of information for somebody who is already familiar. Then I've got these two things on the table. Both could satisfy the notion that the audience is already familiar with this person. Then I'm just going to this notion of introducing this novel. This just vague claims about settings is kind of trash, even though I guess that could be fine. And I look to see, and I like that it's got the person possessing it, right? They're already familiar with this person, so they don't need much about them. There's a novel, and there's like a fun little, I guess, summary of it. I've got two demands here: present the study and the study's findings. I know that the language of findings is a little bit easier, so I'm going to look for that first, and then I'll come back to the concept of studying. So as I look for findings, studied and was initially unsure, I ain't got no findings there. Where the focus, I ain't got no findings there. Used this flying reptiles. Okay, this demands a closer read. They used a technique to analyze these things. There aren't any findings here. On this final read, in a study, they determined this thing had, here's the language of the findings. Ooh, and a little thusarino. Love that. Right, we've got our findings here. I don't really need to look for anything else because nothing else has those very clear findings. I'll just assume that everything else is presented since I'm 1,000,000% sure there were no findings in A, B, or C. As I land into this one, I've got another one that's asking me to introduce a homie and something that they created. And this one's got a new audience. Right now, I'm in love with this thing. I like it. It survives. That's kind of gross. They don't know who this guy is. Don't just name drop without telling me that they're from Trinidad. Then this one says it. I'll let him survive this initial scrutiny, and then this is leaving this out entirely, right? They want to introduce this guy to a new audience. We've got to have something in the realm of introducing him for his people. This one is just beautiful. We've got the introduction for the person right here. We've got the celebrated novels hyping up the novel here, and then this relative clause describing it. I know that I would pick up. This one is garbage. It does discuss kind of the novel, but this does a disservice. I'd also find slight contention because I don't know if the notes, though he is an author from that place, I don't know if it's necessarily from his perspective, but Maybe that's just nitpicking for this one. A is an obvious choice. We love big note sections. I'm looking for some turts, some information about turtles. I want a similarity between the two turtle species. So I'm looking for a similarity between things. This statement of the 7 species, I don't know of any similarity. No one would read this and find the similarity between the two, whatever those two might be. This has language of contrast, right? We've got differences here. Disgusting. This both is pretty chill. They can be found. That's awesome. I can go hang out with them if I would like. I'm going to check D though, just because this isn't that strong. I'm not too in love with it. In the reading of this, we've got an and, which is fun, but the statement that they are different species seems to be expressing a difference. Pick and move on. I want to now summarize the study, which means a ton of components are going to be there, of varying degrees. So now when I'm looking for these, I'm just trying to find everything that has everything from kind of what the study is, maybe a little bit of methodology, but I just like looking for results because those are pretty obvious. We've got a study, they collected data on attempts. This is just a summarize of the study, but it's not hitting that conclusion, which all parts are to be here, right? It kind of wants an overview. These people wanted to know something, so they did a study. That is wrong for the exact same reason that this seems to be. There was a curiosity, but we're missing out what seems to be all of the study. Knowing that they did this thing, studied the success rate, which was, this is resulty, and I really like C as it looks. As I read the final item, we've got this background, we've got what they studied, we've got what it showed, and we have a result. Both of these are wildly tempting choices. I don't see much of a difference when I try to analyze a liar between these two things. They're landing on cliffs, they're landing at cliffs. It's not making any weird claims about the auks or whatever this kind of bird is. So everything seems to be chill. I'm going to go looking to the notes, trying to find out an answer to the question of like, well, what seems to be the findings, right? Because these both seem to present the findings as something. When I read the findings, I do see where C gets its basis from. It's not lying. However, it is misrepresenting the data as there are conclusions derived here and here that it leaves out. The true finding is the general statement that's here, not the specificity offered, right? That's too narrow. That wasn't the only thing they found. They found the relationship between wind and the success. So D gets our bid. The final notes question in this section, they want to introduce paradise to an audience unfamiliar with the novel and its author. Geez, they love these in this set. This seems to be kind of chill. I just skim a whole bunch of details. I'll read past it. This one, tucking them in as a possessive word for paradise, is kind of a rough way to introduce our author, but I do think that this is decent, but I'm going to kill him because it kind of fails tremendously on the author standpoint. We've got some fun little setup for the novel. We've got the author here. Now, there isn't a title right here, so I'll take this back off the table, or put it back on the table. I love this introduction for this author. This one is the hardest of the set for these audiences that are unfamiliar because the free points at the start didn't help us much. I'm going to slow down a bit. This is focusing on the author's life. Paradise is an afterthought. Nobody who knows this would know paradise unfamiliar. They wouldn't get an introduction to this. A falls. B on this slower read makes this claim a historical novel about colonial East Africa. I'm trying to introduce this novel to people who are unfamiliar with the person and the author. This isn't giving me enough. This just squishes the person here, and then just the vague statement about the book. This does a great job. There's a positive at the start, describing paradise as charming. Then we've got the author and a way to describe the author. I love this. I'm going to click on this sucker. This does exactly what B does, and then just makes a statement about the person's homeland. Whatever you would think would be tempting about B, I would just ask you, well, what isn't tempting about D? These are both kind of accomplishing the exact same thing. I should have picked C for this one. Then I start at the best place to start, the second half, at the start. When I look at these words, I've got some vocabulary on the table, so I'm going to look for context clues and signal elements. We've got this signal of contrast here. We've got the context clue, never agree to pay. These little cheapers. Then I read after it. These concerns didn't, I want to put the word stop right here. He was trying to promote the practice. The synonym that I find is just hinder. Easy peasy. In this next one, I'm looking for signal elements. I've got this word typically, often, which is huge, the bronze of asking that have been passed down through the families. I don't know. Oh, here's my signal element of but that's popping. I'm going to look for a context clue. They don't strictly observe every tradition. So they don't strictly, opposite is typically adhere to, right? They typically do it, but they don't do everything. And this just exemplifies that. Gorgeous. If you needed more clues, this, for example, might bounce you to a context clue over here, but it's enough for me. Reading the sentence, I've got because as a signal element in the immediate environment, because the journey of the novel is so, I don't know, with the, this adjunct right here is offering me this word chaotically, which I like, but we found him kind of randomly. So because the journey of the novel is so whatever, under whether the parents will ever be reunited. This is the context clue that was led to me, that because led me to. I love this notion of it being haphazard, right? Chaos links to haphazard. Because it's this thing, they won't be reunited, so there must be something disastrous, right? Fruitless, though negative, doesn't match the chaotic. As I read this sentence, I see immediately popping out of me this word this is a signal element. I'm going to go looking for like what the evidence is. The evidence seems to be they not only, this is another signal element, use strategies to escape, but also switches strategies. They are adaptable guys. So their adaptability is how I'm going to catch this detail. The adaptability demonstrates that single cell organisms may not be limited simple, right? I want the word simple here because they've done do some pretty sick stuff. So I'm going to match my notion of they were not limited to rudimentary, they were not limited to simple. Whew, more vocabulary questions. When it came to food purposes, oh, fine. I've got a signal element here. In this environment, there is no bridge, so you can just infer that the big dash, this M dash, is working like a colon, so this right side is going to be my clue. I land on this assumed. Therefore, they're not antagonistic to this idea. They believe this thing. And that's where I'm landing on here. Though this is a word choice question, we've got these crazy little narratives or poems. There's not much I can do to help you. You just want to find the word that fits, and that really sucks, right? I can pretend that there are context clues or signal elements that help us along, but it's not always the case. As I read this, it's not too expensive. It's not effective. It no longer answers the requirements. It no longer fulfills the requirements. Just the word that works. Sorry if you didn't get it. We have a few more questions left. According to the text, so I'm looking for details. I want to know about helicopters not being able to fly on Mars. So I'm skimming for something to answer this. We've got people wanting to do helicopters. There's my word. Because Mars is atmosphere. Perfect. This is going to be my detail. This is going to inform my answer. I'm living in the text because it's according to the text. So the atmosphere is just less dense, right? We can start typing something out. Atmos, Dolby Atmos, less dense. No resistance. This is my summary of this. No resist. When I start looking at the atoms for something to summarize this, I love this, right? A matches my summary identically. When I look to B, the blades of the helicopter built for Earth are too large to work on. I've got nothing in this. If I were to skim the rest of the test, this is what someone would be led to had they picked B. Let's read this for a moment so I can see why B might be attractive. They can fly on Mars. No, it's longer blades that help. This is the opposite of the detail because the gravity, we weren't talking about gravity, we're talking about atmosphere. This is an instructive moment because, like, I'm not a science teacher, right? Atmosphere, gravity, when it gives me a word in the text, I'm not going to do crazy things and consider, like, well, what? Maybe atmosphere and gravity are synonyms for each other. It's given me the gift of atmosphere here, gave me the gift of atmosphere here. I don't see anything about gravity. I'm not reaching outside of the text for something like this. Not in an according to, based on question, where the details are living there. Too small, sorry. You're totally off. Main idea question here with number 8. I am looking for things that can help me with signal element. I've got an and, so I'm compounding something in this environment. I've got a to, which is just working together with the and to emphasize like a lotness. New technologies may have changed. I like that modality, but we've got our probably signal. Oh my gosh, and another and. These things are discussing the role of these people in these things. these jump out at me that it's trying to show an abundance, and I want to try to pick an answer that engages with the contrast. This notion ain't it, right? This aspect of but is completely dropped. The signal of but is completely dropped by this. They've been entertaining people in their communities for centuries. I don't really think that this text is known about entertaining so much as protecting. That's where we end off on. This makes kind of a doomer perspective, though we probably can use new technologies. Here, the optimism that's presented at the end of the contrast, it seems to drop that signal elements function. I like this, but the claim of many like teaching the best, I have no idea where that would be. The continuing to preserve is offered up right here in this final sentence. I pick it and I love it. Ugh. I'm going to keep it real with you. Main ideas of poetry or novels kind of is rough. There aren't many strategies that can help. We can dance to the end, but that doesn't work here like it does with the main idea questions. I can tolerate reading this one because it's about a sled dog, and I'm sure he's the best boy, so I'll absolutely read about this guy. Dude holds dog, rest of mankind was nothing. Oh my gosh, was as nothing. Chance travelers might praise him or pet him, but he was cold under it all. And from a too demonstrative man, he would get up and walk away. I love this dog. I respect him, and I'm sure he would respect me. When I read through these details, I understand what this passage seems to be about. After he tolerated them, he accepted favors. This notion of decay, I would ask for signal elements to support that, but Buck's always kind of been a gangster, right? Maybe over time he becomes more appreciative of people because then he understands that they recognize what a great dog he is. This mistrust humans, it's a blanket statement, right? He doesn't hate all humans. He loves his main homie, and he'd be intolerant of other ones. That just seems to miss the text entirely. Well, this, I definitely want to pick this one because I'm sure he definitely was well liked, but I just don't really have evidence for that. It's about Buck's regard to other people. It's got to be this one. The respect that he had, the rest of mankind was nothing. My most important sentence for this main idea is actually at the start, but then the rest of it just supports that. Effectively illustrates the claim. Let's go straight to the claim. I find the claim somewhere that he suggests, there's my claim, that upon hearing these songs, he felt an intuitive and unexpected sense of recognition. So I'm going to look for an item that offers both of these. As I read A, the music still remains as the singular spiritual heritage of the nation and the greatest gift. This doesn't engage with my expected. I'm not even going to think about if it's intuitive. Ever since I was a child, these have stirred me strangely. Ooh, that really maps onto unexpected. They came out of the south unknown to me one by one, and yet at once I knew them as of me and of mine. That's intuitive. I am not even going to read these, right? This one's way too long. Not even going to waste my time. I know this is the right answer. Both of my offers I find direct synonyms for, and I absolutely love it. Can I zoom out on you? Data from the graph to complete the example. What's my example, for instance, bounces me back a sentence. So I'm going to read this one. In some regions, female farmers were found to be especially prominent in the cultivation of specific types of crops. Whew, a lot of crop stuff. I'm just going to go for liars first, right? These are a lot of words. I don't really want to engage with them, and I guess I'm running low on time, even though I certainly am not. Most of the farmers, so this entire chart I'm peeking over here is all about females. Most of the farmers who mainly cultivated cereals, so this is that gray. So the gray, and most of the farmers who cultivated non-root vegetables, which is this dark color, most of them in South Ondo were women. Now that's wrong, right? This is a liar. That is true of the non-root vegetables. That is not true of this first bar, a poo-poo liar. When I look to B, I run it through the same scrutiny. More women in Central Ondo mainly cultivated root crops than mainly cultivated cereal. This one I can have a much more familiar with, so I didn't have to chunk all that, but I'll go back to the start. In Central Ondo, so I'm living here, mainly cultivated root crops, which is this one. No, right? This is the lowest bar. Get out of my face. Then I've got these two. Most of the farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables, which is the dark bar, in North and South, were women. Most? Absolutely. That's true. He survives. A relatively equal proportion of women across the three regions of Ondo mainly cultivated cereal. A relatively equal proportion of women across the three regions of Ondo mainly cultivated cereals. Okay, that's true. mainly fine. So I think this is fine, right? Now I'm going to go to the text. In this text, it says that female farmers are found to be especially prominent and even constituted the majority. Even if I were to grant that this one's fine, that the cultivation of cereals is below the majority means that while it might be true, it's disagreeing with our main point here. Select and move on. We're on our final few, our final two, because we had to get to 14. I absolutely love that. Logically completes the text. Let's go to the end. Those who primarily view Zelda as an inspiration for the goat does something. This thus is a signal element. I need a little bit more, so I'm going to bounce back a singular sentence and read what it has to offer. What this is offering me is that she, Zelda, she made stuff. Period. Right? Because she made stuff, I don't want to be yelling at you, because she made stuff, made works of art, right? She made stuff. Because she made stuff, people who think she just was a muse, then we can kind of go into it. I don't know where I would get this concept of their interactions with each other, right? I don't know that they're clapping back at each other. The works of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda in an overly autobiographic light. Somebody who's answering this question just knows that there's some rich lore between these two sweethearts. Overlooking the many factors that motivated him, this sentence puts all the focus on F. Scott Fitzgerald, but it's because she made stuff. People who think she was just a muse, I want something that engages with that. And B's beautiful, right? They misrepresenting the full range of Zelda's contributions to literature, right? She did do stuff beyond just be a muse. So it would be disrespectful of her to view her just as that. If I had more time, I could read more. And this indeed merely supports the previous sentence. And we just see it's all about Zelda and her contributions. But I fought my fight right here and I'm happy with it. The final sentence. Ooh, 5 minutes to spare. We can take a little victory lap here. Logically completes the text. Let's go for that final sentence, which is a chunky boy. I'm going to read this sentence and hit it with a summary. No evidence that CO2 spikes when dinos were doing stuff, right? This is a huge list. Relevant periods. It's a non-restrictive list. So these are just some examples of periods that mattered, right? When they first appeared, when this thing happened, when this thing happened. So this big summary of this final sentence is no evidence that CO2 spikes when dinos were doing things, suggesting that I'm going to try to fight my fight right here, especially in this first section. If I'm desperate, I'll come back to more. There was no evidence that CO2 spikes when dinos were doing cool dino evolve stuff. Forgive me for this. Eve Love. Fluctuations in atmospheric carbon affected different sauropods. Fluctuation. I don't like this immediately. There was no evidence that CO2 spikes did anything to do with this. So that there would be fluctuations that could be found when we didn't think there were any, having different effects just doesn't make any sense. As I look to B, the evolution of larger body sizes in sauropods, which I think relates to one of these things, did not depend on increased atmospheric carbon dioxide. I dig that, right? That relates to what I would present from my logic here. It's right here in this sentence. I move on to C. Atmospheric carbon dioxide was higher on the largest known sauropods than it was when the first appeared. This sentence, we're saying that there's an increase, but I don't like logically following up this statement about spikes with the mere fact that there was just a higher point. The logical entailment of spikes wouldn't merely just be that one thing is higher, because maybe there was like a steady increase. That's not what this text seems to be talking about. I'm going to massacre this guy. These big dino boys probably would not have evolved to such a size if atmospheric carbon dioxide had been slightly higher. So it's talking about carbon dioxide, even slightly higher. This kind of feels like it's making the same mistake that C is. So everyone's probably not evolved to such a size. But there's no evidence even that there's a spike. I don't know where we're getting this from. I love this one. This one's beautiful. Did not depend on. If we were to go engage with the signal element and the however and read more, let's see what we've got. Could grow. They big. Yeah, this, however, was vacuous. It was just like, they thought it was because big levels, but there was no big levels. I love my answer. Did not increase. Done. 14, 27. Skip through. And there it is. 27 out of 27. Time to spare. Too easy. Gosh, this is